Good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking now as both the chairman of Magen Avot and as chairman of Yad Vashem UK Foundation. We will now be hearing from faith leaders, politicians and activists discussing practical steps to support the Uyghur community at this conference, which has been spearheaded by us at Magen Avot Synagogue. As our Rabbi Kelley has said, as Jews and as human beings, we have a responsibility to speak out against injustice and to take the practical steps we can to end this suffering. Yad Vashem is the World Holocaust Remembrance Centre, established to commemorate the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered by the Nazis and collaborators during the years 1933 to 1945. A principal mission of Yad Vashem is education, so that we in the world can learn from history the dangers and consequences that can arise from racism and lead to the deliberate killing of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. Yad Vashem's International School for Holocaust Studies is the only school of its kind. Every year they host over 350,000 school children, university students, military and security personnel, as well as thousands of educators from around the world. We are raising our voices in protest against the unspeakable atrocities that are being committed today against the Uyghur Muslims.
Thank you for those words. You've just heard from Simon Bentley, the chair of Magen Avot and the chair of Yad Vashem UK. We're now going to begin the second session, dealing with political action, and I have the honor of introducing the chair for this session, Dr. Matthew Offord, the Conservative MP for Hendon. Dr. Offord, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for asking me to chair the event this afternoon. And I believe that this second session will be very interesting to many people. We have some very good speakers and we also have a short video. So as time is short, I will start off straight away by introducing the speakers. First of all, we have Sir Iain Duncan Smith, the Right Honourable Sir Iain Duncan Smith, who is the Conservative MP for Chingford and Woodford Green, also former leader of the Conservative Party and the Welfare Minister in a previous government. After Iain was the leader of the Conservative Party, he went on to fund the Centre for Social Justice, an organisation that has a great deal of influence within the Conservative Party and within policy making. Unfortunately, our second speaker, Lisa Nandy, has, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has been unable to attend today's event. She's had a family issue, so we wish her well, but unfortunately she's not here. But we do have Kelley Eckels, Currie, former UN Ambassador at Large for Women's Issues. And we also have Dr. Alan Mendoza, someone that many of you know, and certainly I do, who's director of the Henry Jackson Society. And someone who needs no introduction, but certainly will receive one from us, is Maria van der Zyl, President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And we look forward to their comments. The format will be that they will speak for 5 to 7 minutes on the issue of political action. Can we really achieve anything by engaging with China? And then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And I'd be grateful if you could email your questions in by using the email hello@theus.tv. So that's hello@theus.tv. And then we'll be able to put our questions to the panel. But before I ask Iain to be the first speaker, can I ask that we have our video, which is on behalf of Rodney Dixon, the Chief Prosecutor from the ICC, on his work on the Commission. So can we please have the video?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this message at your very important conference today. My name is Rodney Dixon. I'm a barrister acting on behalf of the East Turkestan government in exile and Uyghur victims. And I have been instructed to launch a case at the International Criminal Court in The Hague in respect of very serious allegations of genocide and crimes against humanity committed against the Uyghur peoples by the Chinese authorities. We have submitted a complaint with evidence to the ICC prosecutor, requesting the prosecutor to open an investigation into these allegations. The International Criminal Court is the only place at the international level where these crimes can be investigated, and then where there is sufficient evidence, prosecuted thereafter. I know you might be asking, well, how does the ICC have jurisdiction when China is not an ICC state party? Well, the answer is a fairly straightforward one, and it comes from the precedent in the Rohingya case at the ICC, which is the following: that if international crimes are committed in ICC state party territories, and then they continue into non-state party territories, in this case, China, then the court does have jurisdiction over the entire criminal conduct. The ICC has held that where an essential element of a criminal offence takes place in an ICC state party, then the court can have jurisdiction irrespective of where the crime continues onwards. So in this case, what we have is cogent evidence of a campaign and policy by the Chinese authorities to round up Uyghurs in many states across the globe, including ICC member states, and to then force them back into China, into East Turkestan, where they are then targeted and persecuted. This policy is one which has been going on for many years. It's taken place in many countries, including some that are signed up to the ICC, in particular, Tajikistan, which is a bordering state of China, and Cambodia. And we have evidence of Uyghurs being arrested there and forced back against their will into East Turkestan. They are never heard from again. These are enforced disappearances over which the ICC has jurisdiction. We also have evidence of Uyghurs escaping because of how they are threatened and persecuted in China into ICC state parties. And going that way also gives the court jurisdiction, because a critical element of the offence takes place in an ICC state party, namely the place where the persons are forced to go. So we have it going both ways. There is clear jurisdiction here to investigate and to prosecute. We have recently provided the ICC prosecutor with up-to-date evidence of what is happening in Tajikistan, in particular, where almost the entire Uyghur population has been rounded up and deported into East Turkestan, where they are then never heard from again. This has all of the ominous echoes of what happened in the Second World War, when Jewish people were rounded up in countries across Europe and forced against their will into Germany, where they were then targeted and exterminated. This is a common element of a well-planned and organized genocide and crime against humanity. And that is why it is so important that the ICC opens an investigation. We are waiting to hear from the prosecutor now, given the recent evidence we have submitted. The prosecutor has said they will meet with us and discuss the evidence, and we are hopeful that an investigation can be opened in the near future to ensure that these crimes do not go unpunished. For far too long, there have been no investigations, no prosecutions for these appalling acts. It's shameful that nothing has been done at the international level to investigate some of the most serious crimes. Now is the time for the ICC to act. It was set up for this very purpose. And we are going to be pursuing this case to ensure that there can be a full investigation, the truth can come out. And where there is sufficient evidence, which we believe there is, then persons can be charged. And if they are charged and they travel outside of China, they can be arrested and put on trial in The Hague. We are at a critical point now where the ICC is going to have to decide what the next step is. And we are calling out widely for support for this case, from governments, from civil society, from NGOs. I would also ask all of you who are tuning in today to support our case, to ensure that it is taken up. It is so vital that this is seen as a priority. We need to take, of course, all steps to halt what is happening. But at the international criminal law level, this is the most compelling one that can be taken. I would implore you to support our case, to spread the word, to provide any information to us if you have that, and to ensure that justice can be finally pursued now, that these acts can both be deterred from happening again and punished. Thank you for your support in this matter. And if you have any questions or wish to have further information about our case, you can get in touch through our webpage. You can support the case as well through our crowdfund and provide information to us as well through our contacts. We are there to receive that, and we are there to take this forward with full vigor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very informative and also a useful background to our discussion here today. So I'd certainly like to thank you, Rodney, for that contribution. Now, the first of our speakers today, as I said, is Sir Iain Duncan Smith. So Iain, I'd be grateful if you're able to address the conference, please.
Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Rodney Dixon, I think that was an excellent statement. It's very interesting to start this short comment from me with a reminder that even as this conference has been going on over the last few weeks, there has been a full public inquiry going in Church House, chaired by Geoffrey Nice QC, where they've taken evidence from a range of people about whether there is enough cause to believe that genocide has been taking place amongst the Uyghur by the Chinese government. There's some pretty harrowing testimony there. So I'm sure that if this reference to the International Criminal Court is taking place, then that inquiry will have huge importance in that. And the second part of it, which is really important, is that I set up with some other colleagues an organization called IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance of China. It's made up of parliamentarians on the left and the right in countries from the free world, countries that believe in democracy, the rule of law and human rights. And we now have 20 countries from Japan to America, and we have 200 members in those countries as co-chairs and a few members in the parliaments. So there is a very strong set of evidence. And with that came a man called Adrian Zenz. Adrian has been doing a huge amount of work on what's been going on in Tibet and, of course, more latterly, amongst the Uyghur. And he produced some documents last year which absolutely categorically prove that this terrible and systematic abuse centered around government action is more than just to stop any violence. It's actually a violent act in its own, and he exposed forced sterilizations of the women, he forced labor camps, shipping many thousands of miles away, and children being taken from their families and taught to speak only Mandarin and to throw off any of their references to their ethnicity. So it's a privilege to be here today to follow up on that. As I said earlier on, we've set up IPAC, and therefore the whole idea here is to understand what is going on and why, and then expose it. The Chinese government, it must be clear, is not a government that cares very much about what people think of it or say about it. It is a dictatorial communist regime, and more recently it has now become almost the plaything of President Xi. It was bad enough before, but President Xi's arrival has made it even worse. Their intolerance and their desperate behavior is affecting thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives in China and many beyond. Beyond the terrible persecution of the Uyghur, which literally seems to be a racist act, frankly, where it appears that not just Tibetans, not just the Uyghur, but even now the Inner Mongolians are facing very serious strictures. But it is the Uyghur that in scale and in approach have suffered perhaps the worst. And as I outlined earlier on, the treatment of the Uyghur is a shocking thing to behold in this particular time, particularly as we look back to those events that took place in the 1930s and 40s, which should act as a constant reminder. And to that end, I thank the Jewish community for this conference. The Jewish community has been phenomenal in its support for these investigations into whether the Uyghur are being literally exterminated by an act of government. No doubt that collective memory of what happened to so many Jewish people during the Holocaust has galvanized everybody to do that. But it's going above and beyond even that, really, to persist in this process. And I thank them also for their support when we tried to get the British government in Parliament to accept that a British court could hear a case and could decide whether genocide was being committed. The government resisted that endlessly, but I think we won the argument and won the case, and we did so with a huge amount of support from the Jewish community, and I want to put my thanks on record for that. But we are, let's face it, dealing with a government which I think poses the most significant threat to the free world that we have seen, certainly since the Cold War, and some might think even more so. I mean, this is a government that thinks nothing of the terrible behavior with the Uyghur. Tibetans, nearly between 250,000 million Tibetans themselves are in labor camps, forced labor camps. As I said earlier on, cracking down on the linguistics and ethnicity of the Inner Mongolians. They have trashed Christian churches, arrested those who would call themselves priests of those churches. They have attacked the sect called the Falun Gong. There's been organ harvesting from them that we know of from very clear evidence. They have trashed an international treaty guaranteeing the rights of individuals in Hong Kong under the one country, two systems. Peaceful democracy campaigners have been arrested, banned from the LegCo, and now many of them fleeing for their lives to Western countries. We have a number here in China. We've opened up this passport system, which would allow them to come here. But still, it's a desperate act. And it's also a government that threatens Taiwan on a daily basis, threatens to invade it if they don't become part of China again, and has invaded and occupied the South China Seas, notwithstanding the fact that the UN has told it that it has no rights. Chinese government has completely ignored them. And so you can see straight away it is a government with arrogant and aggressive ambitions externally and absolutely authoritarian ambitions internally. The very fact that they are pursuing what, as I said earlier on, I think is beginning to be very clear as a racist policy to crack down on those who are not Han Chinese and to force the children of those who are not Han Chinese to become Han Chinese is an act of racial policy, which I have to say, on a scale like this, that we have not seen since the 30s and 40s. And I said the other day to many in my party and in Parliament, and I do not resile from this, we should remember that the same excuses were being made in the 1930s. Oh, well, Germany's only reasonable. It's been hard treated. It needed to have, these extra areas, and we shouldn't get too fussed about it. It'll be all right in the end. Well, we're saying very similar things about China. The UK and many other Western governments have become utterly dependent economically in exports and imports, and also in some very strategic areas. They've become completely dependent to China. We only have to look at the COVID-19 outbreak, which should have been discovered by the WHO much earlier, but that notwithstanding, millions have died. And during it, of course, we were unable in this country to get hold of any PPE equipment, masks, all the coverings for people working with people. I'm sure people died because they were unable to get. That is at the low scale of how dependent we are. Nuclear energy, electric car production, batteries, rare earth materials. China corners every one of these, and far too often the West has kowtowed to China for fear of upsetting them and losing business. Well, we need to stop, and IPAC is absolutely determined to bring to the attention of governments all over the free world that it's time that we no longer are able to turn a blind eye. We cannot pretend that this is okay. We cannot persuade ourselves that by doing this, China will become a reasonable country, as they thought. Opening up the markets has not turned China into a democratic country that understands the rule of law and human rights. So now we need to take action. We need to show them that their businesses and their economy will suffer if they carry on like this. We need to make sure that we place the moral purpose of our governments at the forefront. What greater moral purpose is there to save the lives of those tyrannized by others who would oppress them and end their own lives and the nature of their communities? We saw it before. We do not want to see it again. It is time to act.
Thank you, Iain. It was a very powerful opening to our first physical speaker today. So I just remind you once again, if you do have any questions, if you'd like to email them in, if you use the email hello@theus.tv, and that will get through to you. I've already had some questions come through, so the system is working. Our next speaker is Kelley Eckels Currie, a former UN ambassador for women at large and women's issues. Kelley, if you'd like to please address the conference.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today in this important and extremely timely discussion about a very critical issue, one that I've worked on for quite some time throughout my career. And it is really amazing to see the interfaith cooperation that is emerging around the situation in Xinjiang, as well as the efforts going on across faith communities to try to promote action and to actually move beyond just condemnation, as some of the other speakers have said. I really want to especially thank Magen Avot for inviting me to participate. And I was especially moved this morning, it was morning here when it happened on the East Coast in the United States, when one of the first panelists spoke about the story of Moses at the well in Midian, and how Moses took a great risk to assist female shepherdesses at the well and to help them when they were being mistreated and discriminated against at the well. And it set the right tone for this wonderful conference today. And I think that that's a great segue into some of the things that I'd like to talk about how, as policymakers, as citizens in free societies, as investors in free societies, and just as human beings, we can help to address some of the challenges. And I know, as the Right Honorable Iain Duncan Smith was saying, it can be overwhelming to look at China, which is so powerful and is becoming more and more aggressive and powerful each day, it seems like, and growing economically, and think it's hopeless to try to do anything about the situation. But I don't believe that. I believe that there are things that we can do, and I believe that there are sensitivities that the Chinese Communist Party has that we can exploit. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of those things. I was intrigued to hear one of the other speakers speak about the concept of how hurting others not only harms others, but it harms oneself when you do that. There's a similar concept in Buddhism. And this is, and I think that we all have seen through our own societies how discrimination, violence, and dehumanization have created costs and consequences, not just for the direct victims and survivors of these acts, but for the societies themselves and for the majority communities that perpetrate those acts. And no society is able to escape those consequences, regardless of their political system. I think that China believes that they can, and that the Chinese Communist Party believes that they can carry out the kinds of atrocities and abuses that they are carrying out, and that they will not face the consequences of those acts. But I am convinced that no society can escape those consequences, and that they ultimately will have to deal with and have a reckoning with those things. I also do believe that we do need to acknowledge the challenges of dealing with China as an abuser here. They are not 10 feet tall, and they do have certain vulnerabilities that we can exploit. In particular, Xi Jinping himself craves legitimacy. He wants to be seen as a world leader. He wants China to be viewed as a great power. He wants to be able to portray China as a great power. And so one of the things that when I was in the US government, and especially when we were at the UN, that we focused on with our own rhetoric was, how do we exploit that insecurity that really lies at some of the behavior internationally that we see from the Chinese Communist Party, some of the aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy that's really rooted in a sense of insecurity, grievance, and victimhood that the Chinese Communist Party perpetuates and fosters in order to be able to lash out and act in this aggrieved and aggressive way. So I think that we have seen that the actions to date, while insufficient, have provoked a response from the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that we need to very clearly look at what we have done so far in terms of sanctions, in terms of condemnation, international multilateral coordinated action, and try to determine what has been most effective, what has the greatest impact, and how we can lean into some of those things that have been able to have a more profound impact. For that, I wanted to focus on a few things. I tend to think of this in terms of the long-term goal, obviously, is to change the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party and to end the repression of the Uyghur and other Turkic Muslim minorities, as well as other persecuted peoples in the People's Republic of China. But in the short term, we need to focus on how we can raise the costs of those behaviors to the Chinese Communist Party and ensure that they are not able to just do these things without any consequences or any costs attached to them. So I think that diplomatically, that means that we continue to push in these multilateral spaces, in these multilateral forums, and keep building out the coalition of international voices speaking on this issue, especially in the developing world, where right now the condemnation is largely centered in the Western countries and among the developed countries. But we need to really reach out beyond our comfort zone and get developing countries involved in these conversations too. We can talk to these countries about how the forced labor schemes in Xinjiang, for instance, just serve as a subsidy for Chinese products that then disadvantages other countries that are developing and trying to break into different places on the value chain, for instance. Even if you're not able to make a moral or human rights argument with them, you can make an economic argument with them. I think also we need to really work harder at getting the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and Muslim majority countries to join in and raise their voices about this. China has been able to use their silence very strategically to block criticism and as a seal of approval for their policies and actions in Xinjiang. And we need to really get them to think about at least stop providing cover for the Chinese if they're not ready to speak out directly. And then we need to look beyond the Human Rights Council and the kind of obvious places in the UN at things like the General Assembly, at the women's organizations, the Commission on the Status of Women, other instances where the UN is focusing on gender, on climate, on development. All of these issues have a very strong nexus with Xinjiang, whether it's the Belt and Road and development in Xinjiang, or it's women and Xinjiang and forced sterilization and coercive population control, and the fact that UN agencies are still present in China, working with the same Chinese state apparatus organizations that are carrying out these policies in Xinjiang. All of these things are points that we need to be very vigorously raising across a wide range of multilateral forum, because China really has invested a lot in trying to build up its presence and its image in these forums. They invest a lot, and it's very important to them that when they get criticized, they respond very viscerally. Bilaterally, I think we need to continue to work on the sanctions. They have had an effect, especially the targeting of industries that are impacted by forced labor and implicated in other abuses. Once the sanctions are in place, it's really important that we make sure our governments are vigorously enforcing them and really working to ensure that they are taking those enforcement actions, not only against Chinese companies, but also against our domestic industries, to ensure that they have what they need to know to avoid the companies that are sanctioned and the industries that are sanctioned, as well as and helping to build alternatives. And that brings me to what we as individuals can do. And I think that, and you've heard from others about how important it is to use your democratic voice and reach out to your parliamentarians. That's obviously very critical, but there are other things that we can do. And the first, and in some ways, both the simplest and the hardest thing we can do is as consumers to make sure that when we are buying products, that we do check labels, make sure that we, to the extent possible, are not purchasing products made in China. It's something that I've become it's hard. I know, because I try to do it myself. And so I know that there are times where you literally cannot find an alternative. So in those instances, I will very grudgingly purchase what I need to do. But I will go to the shopkeeper, I will go to the seller, and I will say, look, I really try to avoid purchasing products made in China for these reasons, and I would really prefer to have an alternative. I'm purchasing this, but it's I would like you to try to think about stocking alternatives. And I find that it opens up a really interesting conversation with some of these retailers. I think we also need to make sure that companies like Amazon and others are very clearly labeling products, and that we are holding them to account on country of origin labels, so that we can be informed and active consumers. I think it does take a little bit of work. I'm not going to lie about that. And it can be a little bit more expensive sometimes. But I found that you often end up with a superior product. I do a lot of buying things that are used now. I even the other day bought used hooks because I couldn't find clothing hooks that were made in anywhere but China. So I went to a salvage place and found used ones. I mean, you can do it. It does require some work. And it's maybe not for everyone, but I think it is something that we should think about. The other thing we need to do is use our voices online. There are still Americans and British citizens that are working as propaganda shills for the Chinese Communist Party. They appear on YouTube, and they're able to monetize their accounts on YouTube because the Chinese Communist Party engages in what's called bot fraud and uses click farms to drive traffic to these videos that otherwise nobody would give any mind to. But it's a backdoor way of paying these people to propagandize on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And they almost exclusively, or at least primarily, do this on the issue of Xinjiang. We need to alert platforms like YouTube to these things, make sure they are correctly labeling, and when possible, demonetizing accounts that are engaging in genocide denial, and also acting as agents of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese Party state. So this is something that we can all do, again, just when we're online. Then the final thing that I would encourage people to do, one of the things that's most important to the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese economy, is access to capital markets in the United States, the UK, and the EU. And these liquid convertible capital markets are critical to China's continued economic growth, which is in turn essential to the Chinese Communist Party's continued legitimacy and its ability to rule the Chinese people. We as investors need to be very mindful that our large index funds like Vanguard, and I'm not sure what the UK equivalents are to these things, but they they invest a lot in Chinese government bonds. I've spoken with my investment advisor about making sure that we, to the extent possible, are not invested in products and in index funds that engage in these kinds of purchases. I think you're seeing our Wall Street, I can't say about the city, but I know in the United States, there is a growing awareness of the risks, certainly after the IPO that was such a problem last week with the ride-hailing app in China, Didi. And so we're trying to push this really to get to both make sure that as an investor, as a stakeholder, a shareholder in companies, that they are engaging in responsible practices, and that we're using our voice as shareholders to try to educate and to pressure companies, because they are susceptible to shareholder action. We've seen this on climate, and we're looking very closely at how the climate action and anti-racism action here in the United States to mobilize proxy votes and things like this have impacted companies, and what lessons we can learn about doing that from a human rights standpoint, because it's not enough for companies to say, oh, we're following environmental, social, and governance standards, and we're a good corporate citizen, if they're then turning around and importing products that they can't certify are not made with forced labor, or that they're working with entities in China that are implicated in abuses against Xinjiang. So those are some of the things that I'm working on, and I am trying to do both myself and encouraging my family, friends, and people I know to really do this, because it does take all of us. And it can be very disempowering to look at China and how powerful they are and think, there's nothing I can do, but there are things that you can do. And as a former government official, there were things I could do in that space. And then as a private citizen, I continue to try to find those ways that I can. With that, I'm going to turn it back to our host. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelley. I'm just conscious of time and our ability to ask questions of our speakers. So I'll jump straight into Dr. Alan Mendoza, Director of the Henry Jackson Society.
Thank you, Matthew. And can I just say what a great conference this has been, in terms of particularly this panel already has given you a whole set of things that can be done politically action-wise in order to hold China to account for what it's doing. I mean, you've had obviously Rodney Dixon speaking about the sort of the legal approach to this, and clearly, ideally, we would want to see those responsible for human rights atrocities in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs put up in front of the International Criminal Court. And again, that's quite clear that here's something our representatives and people individually can and should be supporting. You've had, of course, Iain Duncan Smith, who has led national efforts to ensure the British government, the British Parliament, holds China to account. And you've seen some of the measures he has proposed, but also crucially internationally, using his IPAC network to drive similar discussions in other countries. And clearly this hints at what we'll be needing to be doing, which is concerted action across a multiplicity of different places. And finally, again, what Ambassador Currie has said, looking both multilaterally, looking at the institutions where we can utilize collective support to pressure China on the one hand, but also she's given a whole panoply of individual options that people can take. So I don't want to repeat essentially what they have said so well already. I think if you want a quick look at what can be done domestically very quickly, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons issued a report last week which suggested things like a partial boycott of the Olympic Games. I'll come on to that in a second. I don't think that actually goes far enough. Also, of course, looking at banning imports of products from Xinjiang province. Anything made there should happen in that sort of way. They're looking at obviously helping those looking to flee from the region to come to the UK and other matters. So you've got, immediate policy things are going to be driven by politicians, and clearly everyone at home, what they can be doing is writing to their elected representatives and asking them, demanding of them the kinds of actions that we would have hoped to have happened in previous genocides to make sure that China is held to account for that. But to go back to the Olympics, frankly, I don't think it's sufficient to say that the British government should boycott it and British officials shouldn't go to a few cocktail and canapé parties at the Olympics. I have to say, I don't see why we should be going there at all as a country. I don't see why the US, other Western democracies, frankly, anyone who has a concern about human rights should be going to those Olympic Games. And I say that because I agree with Ambassador Currie that actually the Chinese do care about their international reputation. They care about it very greatly. Somewhat surprisingly, given the power they believe they hold, there is a constancy in their efforts to promote brand China internationally, to appear to be a normative state, how they operate. And as a result, the reality is that, games like the Olympic Games and big PR occasions like that are very important to the regime. And we've got really essentially two choices. We can either normalize them by allowing our sports people to go along and participate, even if the government doesn't. But if you do that, you're essentially giving in to what they want, because you will have a full lineup of countries, and the Chinese will shrug it off and go, well, so what if there's not a few British diplomats or the Prime Minister doesn't turn up? We've got the prize. We've got a full set of campaigns going on, or rather of sports people playing it out on the field, track and field. And it doesn't really matter what's happening in terms of the government's not coming. It seems to me much better, frankly, to come back and say we should not be going at all, really. And we've seen in the past that boycotts have an impact. The 1980 Moscow Olympics was a major example of that. It hugely embarrassed the Soviet Union to see that the US, the major athletic power in the world, was not going there on account of the Soviet Union's behavior in invading Afghanistan. And quite clearly, this is a message that we can and should send. Now, people say we shouldn't politicize sport. My answer to that is I'm sorry to say that the fact that Beijing is hosting the Olympic Games is already a politicization of sport, just as it was when Moscow held the Games, when Nazi Germany held the Games as well. You can't pretend to divorce the regime that is a host from the Games in this kind of regard. It's a farcical status to actually suggest that. So I do believe we should be going further, although it is discomforting, obviously, to athletes who've done nothing wrong to say don't go. But if we do care about human rights, if we do care what this regime is doing, we really need to hold it to account and embarrass it internationally as part of a strategy to get it to change its ways. And clearly, there is a long and arduous journey we're talking about. And it's worth for a second casting our mind back to the days of the Cold War to look at what happened in that period as a model, if you like, for how long it takes to achieve change. So if you rewind back to the 1970s, we obviously knew at the time that the Soviet Union was a strategic competitor, but we also knew but didn't do very much about the fact that it was a moral competitor, and it believed it had a system that was superior to the values of freedom, democracy, human rights that others in the world cherished and felt important. The Soviet system was entirely the opposite to that. In terms of economics, it was different. In terms of politics, it was different. In terms of, obviously, human rights abuse, is completely different. But nobody until the 1970s really took this seriously as an opportunity to chip away at what they were doing. But in the 1970s, and it's very interesting to consider how this all started, one of the first groups of people whose cause was taken up by the world was, of course, the refuseniks, the Jews who wanted to leave the Soviet Union and emigrate, but were not being allowed to by the Soviet authorities. And you all know the story. Essentially, you had people who said they wanted to go, the Soviets refused to allow them, put them in prison, put them in labor camps, and there they would have languished, frankly, had it not been for the desire around the world to stand up for those people, many of whom were not connected in the slightest to the refuseniks, and say, we are not going to allow a human rights atrocity like this, an outrage like this, to determine our relations. And you started seeing marches, you started seeing rallies, you started seeing movements emerge, and you started seeing legislation, things like the Jackson-Vanik Act in the United States, limiting trade advances with how people were being treated in the Soviet Union. And that in time led to change for those people. It led to change, of course, in other areas with things like the Helsinki Accords, but the Soviets slowly were held accountable for their human rights abuses and outrages. And what I'm suggesting here is that we can start to bind China into a similar process, start to hold China to account in a way that the Chinese government will not like and will not appreciate, because it should be the axiomatic case, as long as there is atrocities going on, like what is happening in Xinjiang, that the first thing on anyone's agenda when they meet Chinese representatives, government representatives, is what about the human rights abuses? What about the genocide? And that needs to be drummed in repeatedly so that they know they're not going to get away with it. Of course, there are other matters that follow. You can look, obviously, at, of course, various economic boycotts. You can look at the capital markets access that was just mentioned. You can, of course, look at other areas as well. But we have to, I think, take a stand collectively about this. I think the lesson of the past 10 years, 15 years has been that when countries stand on their own against China, China picks them off quite easily because of economic might, economic factors. We've all seen humiliating turnarounds when governments have tried to put human rights at the centerpiece of what they're doing, only to be rolled back by a Chinese rebuff in that way. But it becomes much more difficult for the Chinese government to respond to this if collectively countries are doing this. And I think that's what our previous speakers have been suggesting happens, and clearly that is the most effective way to achieve lasting change. If we work collectively on the human rights strategy, on economic strategies, we are going to get much further than if we do it individually. So we must look at the multilateral organizations, we must look at international cooperation, we should be moving in lockstep, as I'm pleased to say we've been doing in things like sanctions, but clearly we've got a long way to go in that regard. So I suppose the key message here is, for those watching at home, it's a long haul. We're not going to get change overnight in this game. This is going to be something that will be a battle for a generation to convince the Chinese government to behave in a normative fashion when it comes to human rights and other matters. And by the way, when I say other matters, we've got a whole host of problems we know internationally. We know the Chinese government encourages theft, intellectual theft of property, it encourages espionage, all these matters that we know need to be taken into account. We know all the issues of the debt financing that goes on internationally, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is simply a way for China to essentially secure assets in other countries when they can't pay back the interest given on loans that should never have been given. We can see that the G7 have started formulating a response to some of these actions. But clearly that is a path to go. And individually, we must support our legislators, we must support governments in doing that by encouragement, by support, by doing some of the things that Ambassador Currie mentioned, but also by ensuring that our MPs like Iain, Duncan Smith and Matthew Offord get told in no distinct terms that we support what they're doing as well. So the challenge is ours as much as theirs. We must make our voices heard. We must say that never again means never again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had some questions coming through, but it seems that our speakers have anticipated some of those questions, raising issues about the presence of British representatives at the Olympic Games in 2022. Also, the issue of boycotts has been raised, and helpfully we've seen some answers to those questions put up on the board, particularly by Kelley. So I thank you for that. So I'm going to come to our final speaker, Maria van der Zyl. As many people know, she's president of the board of Deputies of British Jews, and it's been a very outspoken critic of this particular issue. So Marie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for inviting me today. I'm really honoured. Alan Mendoza has spoken brilliantly just now, so I don't want to repeat what he's said so ably. But the most important, the critical thing, I think, is awareness raising and campaigning for more groups and countries to recognise what is happening in China. That's absolutely crucial. As a recent example, we welcome Israel's recent moves on this at the UN. Israel was amongst 41 countries at the Human Rights Council that urged China to allow immediate, meaningful and unfettered access so that independent observers could visit the Xinjiang region where the persecution of the Uyghurs is occurring. And this appears to be a change of policy from Israel's new government, and that's very applauded. We have supported, we've had reference to sanctions, for example, on Iran. This is something that I think that we should be looking towards if China, as it appears, is not going to listen for calls to respect the Uyghurs' human rights. As for the Olympic Games, the Board of Deputies is tomorrow we're going to issue a statement calling on the UK government to decline invitations. Please ask them to do that for politicians and dignitaries to attend the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games, unless the government of the People's Republic of China ends the genocide taking place against the Uyghur people in the Xinjiang region. And the Olympic Games absolutely must not be used as a tool to whitewash the atrocities taking place in China. I just wanted to also say that because of our history, many Jews do absolutely feel it's the responsibility of all of us in our community to stand up against persecution. And this year we have indeed commemorated 76 years since the end of the Holocaust of Jews by Nazi Germany. And every year on the 27th of January, on the liberation of Auschwitz, the world remembers how one of the mightiest, most advanced nations in the world sought to commit genocide against a religious and ethnic minority in its midst. Let's also remember, it's relevant as we're speaking now, Elie Wiesel once said, what hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. We've absolutely heard from everyone. Our voices must be heard collectively. We must have a strategy, and we must all speak out. The international community has failed over and over again to protect human beings from genocide. After 6 million Jews and many others were murdered by the Nazis, the world said never again. But when 800,000 people were slaughtered by Rwanda by Hutu extremists, the UN barely lifted a finger in response. And following the genocide of more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica, Kofi Annan, the late Secretary General of the UN, said the cardinal lesson of Srebrenica is that a deliberate and systematic attempt to terrorize, expel or murder an entire people must be met decisively with all necessary means. We are at a crossroads. At the Board of Deputies of British Jews, we ask those in power, what choice will Britain and the world be making? Are we going to stand aside and do nothing as millions of people are herded into concentration camps, as people stigmatized for their ethnicity and religion are made to do forced labor, as women are forcibly sterilized and children are removed from their parents? And in the past 18 months, as well as hosting a number of events with the World Uyghur Congress and Muslim partners to highlight this issue, and making a number of interventions with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, I want to go on record to compare China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims to the Nazis' German treatment of Jews. We've had a lot of talk about this. It's not a comparison at all that we make lightly. The Holocaust was unique, but nobody could watch the news reports over recent months about the Uyghurs and fail to notice the similarities between what is alleged to be happening in the People's Republic of China today and what happened in Nazi Germany 70 years ago. People being forced onto trains, beards of religious men being trimmed, women being sterilized, and the absolutely grim spectre of concentration camps. Earlier this year, we turned our attention, as Iain Duncan Smith has said, to the UK Parliament, holding events, lobbying MPs in support of an amendment to the government's trade bill, which would have strengthened Parliament's powers to prevent preferential trade deals, which would amount to a government dealing with countries that commit genocide. Our voice absolutely matters. Everybody's voice, every action can lead to successful actions, and there was a historic vote backed by MPs of all parties, which would absolutely not have been possible without the tireless effort of so many people, including Sir Iain Duncan Smith and Lisa Nandy, who cannot be with us today. So our voice matters. We all have to work together. The world mustn't be silent. I appreciate that we are running over time, so I want to thank you again for inviting me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. We were going to have an opportunity to ask questions. Questions coming through the forum as we continued with the discussions. And so I think we have covered that area, and I'm acutely conscious of time, and there is one more panel after this. But I have to say, if we've answered the question, political action, what can we really achieve? Well, I think the answer has been given by all of our speakers. Certainly Iain spoke about IPAC and the way it's almost an organisation within governments across the world who are seeking to take action, and perhaps in some ways embarrassing their own national governments to address this issue. which I believe has not been fully addressed by the British government. I know that's a view that Iain certainly agrees with. And Iain does actually have the distinction of being banned from the country because of his activities in the British Parliament, something which some of us find completely repugnant. Also, the issue that Kelley mentioned about Muslim cooperation, I think, is very important. There has to be more of a dialogue and more criticism and a speaking out by Muslim countries about the treatment of the Uyghurs in China. And that certainly will be a powerful voice. But so far, we haven't heard that. And that's something I would like to see as well. Now, Alan spoke about the international reputation of China and how China is actually concerned about that. And I think the whole issue of the Olympics, like he said, in previous Olympics under totalitarian regimes, is an opportunity for us to exert greater pressure on it. And I know he advocates a delay a move approach in that we've already had a delay of the Olympics once, and so perhaps it can be delayed and even moved to another Asian country. And finally, Maurice spoke about Jewish responsibility. And I have to say, I think that's a very powerful issue, because when this issue came to Parliament, I was certainly aware of the Uyghurs, but the force of the Jewish community and the way that people approach this issue, making it clear that this is not the same as events in the past, but this was an action that we could not allow to continue and we should not simply ignore, I think is a very, very powerful one, and something that has resonated with me particularly. But within Parliament, action has been taken. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee report was mentioned, and that does contain some recommendations for the government. It'll be interesting to see how the government will respond to that, and it will give us all a leader, a direction of where we can go, not only in the use of our buying power, the boycotts that we mentioned, but also in the decisions we take about whether to engage in activities such as the Olympics in 2022. Can I thank all the speakers? It has been a really interesting discussion. Certainly something for me to go away and to think about in a bit more detail. And I think there is further action that politicians can take. But as Alan said, and I may come to regret this, it's always a good idea to lobby your representatives in Parliament and elsewhere to ensure that they are aware of your strength of feeling on the issue and not to allow people to forget. So can I thank everyone for coming along today? Can I particularly thank the speakers, who are all very engaging and very interesting, and conclude this part of the conference. Thank you.